So last night, actually, there was a discussion whether we should, address God by all of these different names, because when people pray today, you typically don't hear people using these different names. And my goodness, if you happen to be in a situation where you're experiencing spiritual conflict and it's getting down and dirty, you could pray to Yahweh of hosts, Yahweh of armies. Yahweh of armies, please come and handle this conflict. Or if you are, you want to have a child, who do you pray to? Shaddai. In fact, I just did that this morning. Is this being recorded? Yeah, actually as well. Anyway, there's a couple back in Columbus that asked me to pray for them to have a child. They've already had one child. They want to have a second child. So who did I pray to this morning? I prayed to Shaddai. And it's like, that shows the relationship that God has with us on that particular level. And, if you find that you're not been obedient and you've had to ask God to forgive you, address him as Adonai, my master. I want to be reminded of the fact that you are, in fact, the one who gives the orders, and I am the one that's supposed to obey. And we haven't, of course, talked about Father. Father does not appear much in the Old Testament. Rather, when the disciples asked Jesus, teach us how to pray, he said, our Father. That was new. Israelites were not in the habit of calling God their Father in the Old Testament. That just did not happen. That was a relationship they didn't have. The Ruach, okay, what's that? The Spirit. The Ruach was not given to everybody in the Old Testament. Who got the Ruach in the Old Testament? What's that? Prophets. Who else? I'm sorry?
Some kings.
And kings. The king would get the Ruach, and prophets would get the Ruach. And that was it. It was very special. When does the Ruach finally come upon all of God's people? After Jesus leaves, and the Spirit comes in the book of Acts, you can begin to call God your Father, okay, because you have his Spirit. That's a name that is characteristic of the New Testament, not of the Old Testament. So we have this wonderful array of personal names by which we can, in our prayers, address God when we're focusing on certain issues. And if you stand before him in the awe of this creation out here and you're praising him for all this stuff, you can address him as what? Elohim. Elohim. You did a great job matching the sky with those green trees. Elohim. Now, a question that came up last night was, is it advisable to call God Yahweh? Should we be doing that? Because in most churches, are there any churches that you know that call God Yahweh? Address him as Yahweh. In your church?
Yeah, but only sometimes.
Sometimes. And the question arises, is that something that we should be doing? And very briefly, I'd like you to turn in your Bibles for just a second, take a look at a couple of issues in that regard. Turn, if you will, to Exodus chapter 31. And as you're turning to Exodus chapter 31, I want us to think about this phrase, to call upon the name of the Lord. I mean, you hear that a lot in the Bible, don't you? Call upon the name of the Lord. You know, how does it often close? All who call upon the name of the Lord will be saved. Okay, you hear that a lot. It's in the Old Testament. It's also in the New Testament. So what I'm after this morning is, what does it mean to call upon the name of the Lord? In English, if you say call upon somebody, what does that mean? We're going to call upon somebody. What does that mean? I'm going to call upon Sebastian. What am I going to do? What am I saying I'm going to do?
Depend on him.
What's that?
Depend on him.
I'm going to call upon him? Yeah, possibly to depend upon him. Really? I'm going to call upon him. I'm going to choose. Who said that? I'm going to choose him. You're going to select him out of a larger group. I'm going to call upon Sebastian. Not you. I'm calling upon Sebastian. Okay, what's another meaning of call upon? What's that? To ask, call upon. Probably in the same sense, though, isn't it? I'm going to call upon him for it could be any task. I'm going to call upon him to do this job or to answer this question or whatever it is. I'm singling him out from everybody else. There's another meaning for call upon. I think there is. To bring? That's how you see it? Use that in a sentence. To bring. You may, can you think of it? Can somebody help her out? To bring? You may be right, it's just that's not a meaning I'm used to. I mean, it almost sounds to me like it's the same notion of singling out somebody from. So you can call upon somebody, you single them out to do a task, to answer a question, to respond to a certain issue, whatever. Yes?
So when I think to call upon, I remember when Saul called upon Samuel.
Okay.
When he was already gone, he went to the witch's place and they called upon Samuel. And so what does that mean to come?
Really, that's actually, I don't think that's actually used in that passage, call upon. But that's what call upon. The other thing, and maybe we don't use this anymore, but if you're going to call upon somebody, sometimes it has the meaning of to visit. Like, I'm going to call upon this person. That would be to visit. Does that meaning still exist in English? You don't use that anymore? Not very much. Okay, when I was younger, you'd call upon somebody with me to go, let's go call upon Bob. Or you call upon people at a church visit. That doesn't work very much anymore? Oh, okay, interesting. Let's go. That's what you do now. Okay. So the primary meaning of call upon somebody is to select somebody out of a group to do a particular task, okay? And the problem with that is that that's partially what it means in the Bible, but there's another dimension to it. Let's take a look at it because we have in Exodus chapter 31 a component that's added to it, and that's this word name, to call upon the name of somebody. That's a little different than just calling upon somebody. Okay, you're calling upon the name of somebody. And so in Exodus chapter 31, we actually have a good example of this, and I want to see how the ESV translates that. Of course, you're all using ESV, right? You don't mind if I use the New American Standard, do you? Okay. So in Exodus chapter 31, would somebody please read for me, beginning with verse 1. Okay, so we're having a description here of the tabernacle that's going to be built. And who was reading this? You were. So Hayden, when you translated that in verse 2, what I heard you say was called by name. Is that what you said? Called by name. Now, that is the Hebrew behind this. It's something that is boilerplate. This is the verb kara. And then we have the preposition bait, and then we have, add on top of that, we have the word for, oh, you know what this word is. Name, right? We talked about that yesterday, okay? Kara, they have this preposition. This is the key problem here. B and then shem, okay? It's translated here how, Hayden? Call what? Call by name. What does that mean? It means all these people in ancient Israel, they're around Moses, and what? Singles out one person, and how does he single him out? By what? Calling him by name. So Bezalel is selected out, okay? Take a look, if you will, also go over in chapter 35. Chapter 35. Could you read that one for us too, Hayden? 35:30. Okay, good. It's the same issue. Kara plus this preposition b and the word for Shem, to call by name. And what does that mean? It means Moses and God go, Bezalel, right? That's how you call somebody by name. Derek? I call Derek. What did I just do? I called him by name, okay? So turn, if you will, to Isaiah chapter 45. Isaiah chapter 45. Maybe somebody else could read for me, please, in verse 3 and following. 45, 3 and following. This is where God is calling, he's calling Cyrus to take care of his people. So read the beginning of verse 3.
I will give you the treasures of darkness and the hoards in secret places, that you may know that it is I, the Lord, the God of Israel, who call you by your name.
Oh, and in fact, if you look at the very first verse, thus says the Lord to who? Cyrus. And you just read, Sebastian, says, God says, I have called you what? That means God said what? Cyrus. And it's the same thing. Kara plus b plus Shem. Okay, it's translated how? Call by name. Okay, take a look also, still in Isaiah, if you take a look over in chapter, actually, let's go to the book of Psalms, Psalm 43. Psalm 43. Is that what I want? Actually, do me a favor. Let's turn to Esther chapter 2 instead. Esther chapter 2. My apologies. Esther chapter 2. And maybe somebody could read verse 14 for me.
Who was in charge of the concubines. She would not go into the king's inn unless the king delighted in her. She was summoned by him.
Okay, this is the story of Esther, and the issue is, in order for her to come back into the king's presence, she had to, what was the last phrase there? Summoned by name. It's the same thing. Kara plus b plus Shem. Called by name. Okay, this is what you get over and over. Very clear in all of these passages. ESV does it, NASB does it. Everybody does this exactly the same. This preposition here is a preposition that often refers to an instrument. Okay, like if I'm going to pound a nail with a hammer, I use this. It's the instrument. I'm doing something with. It's like this is the instrument. You call them by name, by their name. If you repair a car with tools, you do it by those tools. That's it, okay? Why am I stressing this? Because for some strange reason, we actually know the reason, it's a little complicated, but for some strange reason, when it comes from God calling us by name, or a king calling a woman by name, or always calling by name, for some strange reason, when it comes to us, calling God, we change the meaning. We change the English. Take a look. Turn to the book of 1 Kings. 1 Kings chapter 18. And I believe this passage is going to help you see the distinction and why translations do this. Be curious what the ESV has to say. 1 Kings chapter 18. Here's the situation on Mount Carmel where you have Israelites who can't decide whether they want to follow Baal or whether they want to follow Yahweh. Okay? Two different gods with two different names. And here's Elijah. He comes on the mountain. He says, you guys need to make a distinction. So in 1 Kings chapter 18, we take a look, go down to verse 24. Somebody read it. Let's see what the ESV does here. What do you have? The CSB. Yeah, let's see what the ESV says. Have you got it? 24? Oh, do you see the difference? So here's Baal and here's Yahweh, and I have no idea why English says, you call on the name of your God, and I'll call him in. No. What is it actually? It should be what? You call, you've got two gods here. It's you call what? You call Baal by name, and I will call what? I will call Yahweh. What? By name, okay? And the God who answers, he is God, okay? And the people answer and say, well, that's a good idea. What does the ESV say? Is it a good idea? What's that? Well spoken. I like New American Standard better. That's a good idea. So verse 25. So Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, choose now for yourselves and prepare a sacrifice and call, my Bible says, call on the name of your God. What should it be? Call your God by name. That's what this is everywhere else and about. For some strange reason, when we do it to God, it's like, oh, call on the name of your God. It's a little bit vague. But if you call God by name, is that specific? Yes. And by the way, I want you to understand why this story is so important. This is a polytheistic world. People believe that there are a lot of gods out there. So if you're wanting to make sure you get the right God, what do you have to do? You have to call him by name. You got to call him by name. In a polytheistic world, do me a favor, turn to the book of Psalms. I'll just pick a couple Psalms at random. I don't think you've ever noticed this before. Psalm 23. What's the first word in Psalm 23? First two words. Lord. The Lord. And it's what, by the way, which name of God? Yahweh. Okay, take a look in verse 24. What's like the fourth or fifth word? Yahweh. In Psalm 25, what's one of the first words that appears there? Yahweh. Psalm 26, what's one of the first words that appears? Wah. Psalm 27, what's the first word? Yahweh. 28, Yahweh. 29, Yahweh. 30, Yahweh. 31. Okay, we can keep going. Wait a minute, do you know why Yahweh always appears? This is the first element. There's a few Psalms that are separate, and there's some reasons for that, because they're not actually addressing God. Why are they starting out by saying, Yahweh? Why? Possibly, but in terms of what we've been talking about. Call him by name. And why do you need to call him by name? Why do you need to call him by name? Who you're talking to? Is this Baal? Is this, Marduk? Is this Ishtar? Which God are you calling on? Remember, Elijah's problem was, how long are you Israelites going to alternate? You call Baal by name, you call Yahweh by name, and the one that answers, well, no, he's God. It is not a minor significance for the psalmist to continually start with Yahweh. So anybody listening to him might be Baal worshipers. They're going to go, oh, he's not talking to Baal, he's talking to Yahweh. Prayer gets answered. You know who did it? Yahweh. So I want us to see that in answer to the question, should we be addressing God by the name Yahweh? God seems to think it's pretty important. Call me by name, because that establishes the relationship. We don't do that in the church. And the reason we don't do that is what? Why don't we? Why don't we? Yes.
A lot of uneducated people in our churches.
It's just force of habit, right? Habit, carrying on ignorance that has gone on for centuries. Unfortunately, we separated from the Jewish community. You know, what happened about 1900 years ago was very, very sad. Most of the early Christians were what? Were what? Yeah, most of the early followers of Jesus were Jews. And then what happened in 70 AD, the Jews revolted against Rome. And when the Jews revolted against Rome, it forced Rome over a period of 3 to 4 years. Actually, the last resistance took 7 years for the Romans to defeat the Jews. That had never happened to the Romans before. Nobody had ever stood up to the Romans like that. And the Romans just smashed the Jews. I mean, it was humiliating what the Romans then did to the Jews. They actually made the Jews pay a special tax. After the Jewish war in 70 AD, they said, you Jews, because of what you did and revolted, we're not only burning your temple, we're going to force you all around the empire, if you're Jewish, we're going to force you to pay a special tax. Nobody else has to pay. And that tax is going to go to fund a temple to Zeus in Rome. How humiliating is that? And by the way, you know how you could, you wonder, well, how could they tell who Jews are? We actually have census lists. A couple of census lists have survived. And to find out if you're Jewish, you know how they tell? They say, pull your pants down. If you're circumcised, you can't hide that. You know, Joshua was circumcised. Pay the tax for the temple of Zeus in Rome. So now let's suppose you are a follower of Jesus, but you're a Gentile. Okay, you're a follower of Jesus. And the Romans, they go, oh, these because Jews and Christians who follow Jesus were monotheists. They were the only monotheists in the empire. And the Romans kind of put the two together. And the Christians started saying, oh, no, we're not like those Jews. We're not like those Jews. We don't want to suffer like those Jews. And so there was a rift that occurred at that point. And then guess what? When the Christians started to get persecuted, what did the Jews say? Oh, we're not like those Christians. No. We may be monotheists. Yeah, we may read some of the same Bible, but no. And there was a big split between between the Jewish and the Christian communities. And for 1900 years, that sad split has continued. When in fact, does God have a heart for the Jewish people? He does. And we Christians have made a divide. In fact, we've persecuted the Jews over the centuries. So we have this habit then of, we just use the Greek terms and we don't know about this really intimate name for God. And it's force of habit over the centuries. We've been separated from the Jewish community. And to use the name, I mean, I know many individuals, once they are aware of it, they begin to say, yeah, I need to address God by his name, Yahweh. Now, there is another element that you need to keep in mind. And that is, if you are associating with Jews, it can be very harsh on Jewish ears for them to hear the name Yahweh. So personally, when I go into a synagogue, I do not say the name Yahweh. I do not. Because as soon as I do it, what are they going to do to me? Well, they're going to kick me out. I'm not coming back. Okay? It's just a matter of diplomacy. Okay? Remember, Jesus said, be wise as serpents, innocent as doves, but wise as serpents. And so, depending... What's that?
Why don't they let you say Yahweh?
Because that is a name that, remember, for 2,000 years, Jews have not said the divine name because it's just, don't say it. Remember, we talked about that the other day, that people would use it for magical purposes, and so Jews said, let's just stop. Okay. And they substitute Adonai, for it. So there is a matter of diplomacy, but quite frankly, when you get into the New Testament, Paul says, that's one of the ways that the early church is defined, and this is kind of an interesting thing to think about. I think it's in the book of 2 Timothy. Take a look in 2 Timothy if I can find it. 2 Timothy... 2 Timothy 2. Yeah, Somebody read 2 Timothy 2:22 for me.
So flee youthful passions and pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace along with those who call on the Lord from a pure heart. Have nothing.
Well, wait a minute. Now read that again. He tells Timothy, flee from youthful lust and pursue after righteousness, faith, love, and peace with those who what?
Call on the Lord from a pure heart.
With those who?
Call on the Lord.
Those who call Yahweh by name. This is one of the ways that the church defined itself. These are not Jews. We followers of Jesus do what? We call Yahweh by name. Jews don't. That actually was something that separated. And that's one of the defining ways of looking at the church. We call God by name. That's what distinguished the early followers of Jesus. So in response to the question, should we do this? This is something that actually defines Jesus' followers, shows that that relationship has been restored, that we have this intimate relationship with God. Does that, I don't know who raised the question yesterday, but does that answer the question? Was it? Yes. Okay. Any further questions on that? Yes.
Oh, I'm wondering, what was the verse on be wise as serpents and innocent as doves?
Oh, I actually didn't cite that. That's from Jesus said that. I actually don't have that off the top of my head. Okay. So we have a number of names for God that we've looked at, and we've seen, Shaddai and Lord of Hosts. We've looked at Adonai. We've looked at a number of these, and one of them, responding to another question that you had asked, was, do angels die? Is that something that one of you asked, or several of you have asked? Do angels die? Who was that? Was that you? Oh, you asked a lot of good questions. And I'd like to pursue that because there's a very big picture here that one needs to keep in mind, and it's associated with the names of God, and in particular with the name Elohim. Whoops. In particular with the name Elohim, because we ask ourselves, what does Elohim actually mean? There is a very large realm behind this word Elohim, and I'd like us to look at a couple passages to help us understand, moving ultimately to that question, do angels die? We have a larger picture of God that we need to keep in mind. So I'm going to ask you to turn to the book of 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel 28. In 1 Samuel 28, we have a situation where Samuel is dead. The prophet Samuel is dead, and Saul, somebody mentioned this earlier in this hour. Can you tell us the story real quick, a summary?
Yeah, so Saul calls out to God because of the whole, he was fighting the Philistines at the time. He calls out to God, and God doesn't answer, and he goes to different prophets, and God doesn't answer the prophets either. So he goes to a medium or a witch, and asks her to bring up Samuel. It says, and the woman said, "Who shall I bring up for you?" And he said, "Bring up Samuel for me." And when
Very
the
good.
woman saw Samuel, she cried out, and she was like, "You're Saul." And Saul had previously.
Okay, but you're right at the passage we wanted to take a look at. Maybe you can even read that for us, where she says, where Saul says, "What do you see?" I think that's probably down in verse 12 and following.
Yes, when the woman saw Samuel, she cried out with a loud voice, and the woman spoke to Saul, saying, "Why have you deceived me? For you are Saul." The king said to her, "Don't be afraid, for what do you see?" And the woman said to Saul, "I see a divine being come up out of the earth."
Okay, so that's the key part. Was that the ESV you were reading?
No,
NSB. Wow, good man. What does the ESV say there? I see a what?
God coming out of the earth.
A God? Wow, ESV nails it. They beat the NSB on this one. It's the word Elohim. It's a lowercase g, but this is the point. is that when you would see what might be called maybe a human spirit, or you might even call it a ghost, right? Kind of a ghost. This is the disembodied spirit or whatever. We might call it a ghost. It's called a what? It's called Elohim. It's called God, okay? Not only that, this is not the only case. So if we were to draw a circle here, and we want to say everything inside this circle is Elohim. Okay, we're trying to find out what are the components that make up Elohim. Because obviously it's not just the one God who's created everything. The word Elohim also refers to like a ghost of a deceased human coming up out of the ground. What else does it refer to? We could take a look and go to Psalm 82. What's that? In Psalm 82, once again, I'll be intrigued to see what the ESV says here. In Psalm 82, beginning in verse 1. What do we have here? Good. So here we're told in the midst of the gods, God has taken his stand. What is that a reference to? So here's God, here's Yahweh, here's God, and he's taken his stand in the council of the what? Of the gods. Who are they?
The angels.
What's that?
Heavenly beings.
Heavenly beings. Yeah, these are angels. So in this category of Elohim, we could put angels. Angels are Elohim. That strike is a little weird. And we can put down here ghosts. And of course, we've got God, the one God. All of these, I hope you see that the word Elohim is really an all-encompassing term referring to what? What might you say is the definition of an Elohim, given that these three components can be in it? Spiritual beings. Is that right? Is that what you said? Anything that's considered not physical. It's intelligent, okay? It has a spiritual reality, but it's not physical. That's what an Elohim is, okay? Now, here's the trick. How do you distinguish the one true God from all of these others? And the answer is, you put the definite article in front of it. He is the Elohim. And that is how, and you often find this in the Old Testament, you put the definite article in front of it. You know, this is not a reference to disembodied human spirits. It's not a reference to angels. It is the Elohim. He's the one that defines the entire category. Is this a little too complicated, or is it making sense? Okay, good. The reason why this is important is it tells us that who is made in the image of God? We are in the image of God, aren't we? And who else? The angels are also in the image of God. In fact, Elohim is a perfectly acceptable term to refer to them. So this is why God can take his stand in the divine council, interact with them. Turn to Psalm 8, for example. Take a look in Psalm 8. Psalm 8. And we have a paean of praise addressing God and how he has taken care of humanity. And if you'll notice in verse 4, maybe somebody could begin reading in verse 4. Once again, I'm interested to see how the ESV translates this. Very good. I'm interested in verse 5. You've made him a little lower than the heavenly beings. Is that what it says? You want to take a guess what the Hebrew word is? Elohim. Why is this intriguing? Because there's more than one way to translate that verse. You've made him a little lower than Elohim. And there's a little ambiguity there, because what could it refer to? It could refer to angels, or it could refer to God. A little ambiguity there. The ESV has opted to say heavenly beings. My New American Standard says what? You have New American Standard? My New American Standard says God. Yours says angels. Yeah. So the point is, you have made humans a little lower than angels, God. Okay? They all partake of the same quality of existence. Okay? So, can humans die? Yeah. Can angels die? Yeah, okay. Well, we know that God can't die, right? He is the Elohim. He doesn't die. What is, can angels die? Take a look. Go back to Psalm 82. Psalm 82. We have here an interaction between God and his divine counsel. In verse 1, it says, God takes his stand in his congregation. He judges in the midst of the gods. And God begins to speak in verse 2. How long will you judge unjustly? That is, these angels have not done their job. They have not done their job, and they have failed to do justice. And so God says in verse 3, this is what you're supposed to do. Vindicate the weak and the fatherless. Do justice to the afflicted and destitute. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them out of the hand of the wicked. And now the psalmist has a little commentary here in verse 5. The psalmist says, these Elohim do not know, and they don't understand. They walk about in darkness. The foundations of the earth are shaken, because this is a major cataclysm. And God begins to speak again in verse 6. I said, you are gods. Who's God talking to now? The council of the angels. I said, you are gods, and all of you are sons of the Most High. Nevertheless, you will, what? What? You will die like what? Like humans. You will die like humans, and you will fall like any one of the princes. And then the psalmist closes off in verse 8 by saying, arise, O God, you judge the earth. Like, the angels are not doing a very good job. So would you please judge the earth? For it is you who possess all nations. So the answer is very straightforward. Can angels die? Oh man, God is he terminates. And by the way, this is one of those angelic rebellions that we don't know very much about. At some point, there was some corruption in the heavenly places, and God had to say, "That's it. You are terminated. You die." And we don't know much about this particular event. Turn over, if you will, to the book of Job. In Job chapter 4, we sometimes have an exalted view of the angels as if somehow they can't make mistakes, or they're perfect, or they're eternal, or whatever. We overestimate the status of angels. How does God feel about his angels in general? Would somebody read for me in Job chapter 4, beginning with verse 17? Oh, by the way, how would you answer that question? No, this is a rhetorical question. Can humans be pure? No, they cannot. Okay, keep reading.
He puts no trust even in his slaves, and again his angels he charges air.
Read that again. What about his angels?
Against his angels he charges air.
Against his angels, he charges error. What does that mean? Yeah, it says in verse 18, he says, he puts no trust in his servants, and against his angels he charges error. How much more those who dwell in houses of clay? That would be us, whose foundation is in the dust. Does God trust his angels? No. As we saw in Psalm 82, God said, look, you got a job. You're supposed to protect the fatherless, take care of the widows. You haven't done it. You're retired permanently. And here we find in Job says, God doesn't trust his angels. They make mistakes. Yes?
Does this mean angels require salvation?
That's a really good question. We don't know. We do not know. What we do know is that in the angelic realm, that it's very much like the human realm, that there are rebellions. Can you name a famous rebel? Okay, Lucifer. Okay, there's one. Let's turn to the book of Ezekiel 28. Here's another one. Here's another one that gets terminated. The Terminator. God is the Terminator. Ezekiel 28. Here we have a rebellion of a very important figure in the divine realm. And Ezekiel 28, we are told in verse 12, Ezekiel is called the Son of Man. Son of Man, take up a lamentation over the king of Tyre and say to him, and when he says king of Tyre here, he means the angelic presence that's behind the king of Tyre. Okay? That this is a very common theme in the Bible, that over all the nations God has appointed different angels, in charge of different countries and so on. And he says to the king of Tyre, thus says the Lord God, you had the seal of perfection. You were full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. You were in Eden, God's garden. Every precious stone was your covering. Ruby, and he gives a long list of beautiful stones. All of these things were in you on the day you were created. They were prepared. Verse 14, you were the anointed cherub who covers. So we know what class of angel it was. It was a cherub. I placed you there in the Garden of Eden. You were on the holy mountain of God. You walked in the midst of the stones of fire. Wow, we've never heard that anyplace else. That's really interesting description of something taking place in the heavenly. You were blameless in your ways from the day you were created until unrighteousness was found in you. By the abundance of your trade, you were internally filled with violence, and you sinned. So I've cast you as profane from the mountain of God. And I have what? Destroyed you. O covering cherub from the midst of the stones of fire. Your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom. If you go down to verse 18, by the multitude of your iniquities, by the unrighteousness of your trade, you profaned your sanctuaries. Therefore I brought fire from the midst of you, and it did what to you? And not only that, it not only consumed you, it says, I have turned you to ashes. So can angels die?
Yes.
They get turned to ash. Okay. And here's another one. We don't know much about this particular figure. It apparently was somebody very close to God. He says, you walked among the stones of fire. And then iniquity was found in you. And where is this creature now? All we are is dust and wind. Yeah. He's turned to ash. Yes.
Does that mean every single angel will die, or is it the ones who go against God?
Clearly the ones who go against God. Do you and I have the option of having God give us eternal life? Yes, we certainly do. And this seems to be something similar to the angel. We don't know a lot about the angels. The Bible is all about whose story? Our story, and how we relate to God. Angels come into it periodically, sometimes they help, sometimes they don't. But we don't know a lot about their story. And if God has done something to redeem us, he's likely done something to redeem them. Yes?
So are angels only men? Because in the Bible it called them sons of God.
When it says sons of God, the term sons of something is something that identifies a relationship, okay? It does not necessarily mean that they're made of the same material. It doesn't mean that they're men. It means that's the relationship they have with God. God is their source in the same way that God is our source. We're called sons of God in the New Testament. In the Old Testament, they're called sons of God, but they're not human, not by any means. Okay?
Are angels still active?
Still active? You bet. Very much so.
Do you have some examples? Like in Paul.
I'm just hesitating for a moment. I'm not sure if I should tell you this. I think my wife would probably be very disappointed with me to tell this to you, but I will tell you this. I once what time is it? So
That bird just like flew into the window. Yeah, that's our answer. Angels are slow.
There you go. Yeah, I feel comfortable in sharing this, and you can do with this what you will. But about a year ago, my wife, what happens is several years ago, I explained to my wife that the word worship in the Bible, of course, does not mean worship. Okay, I know you're heavy into worship and so on, but there's no place in the Bible where people worship with the word worship. Okay, every time you see the word worship in the Bible, it always means to prostrate. It always means to lay flat on the ground. I know those in the back can't see, but you lay flat on the ground. That's every place you see the word worship. It always means flat on the ground. We have developed a new meaning for the word worship in English. In the Bible, there's no word for worship. It's prostrate. So whenever you see the word worship, it means to prostrate. So my wife had picked this up, and my wife was a woman of prayer. And I mean dramatically so. And she didn't tell me this, but she began, when she was by herself, she began to prostrate full on the floor. When I was gone, the house was empty, and she would pray, she would prostrate herself on the floor. And I never knew about this, and I never would have found about it. This is my wife. She's incredibly humble. She never told me this. But one day I was reading a book about this a girl who had a near-death experience, and how there are a lot of these stories of people that die and they come back and they say, I saw Jesus, or my life was turned around, things like that. And so I was sharing this with my wife, and I was saying this little 6-year-old girl, and it was really pretty dramatic. And so I said, let me read it to you. So I read about 2 pages, and I was reading it. All of a sudden, my wife stopped me. She says, read that again. So I read it again, and she goes, of course, my wife is writing these things out. She can't speak. She's writing these things out. She says, she said, and the issue was that this little girl had said when she had this vision of heaven, and I'm not endorsing it, I'm not saying it was genuine or not, I'm simply saying this what this girl experienced. And this little girl said that, these angels were like, whoa, they're like 12, 15 feet tall, and which is really strange because, most little children think of an angel, they'll think of an angel as like your size, but it's like, no, they're 15 feet tall. They went all the way to the ceiling kind of thing. And my wife said, read that again. I said, read it. And she says, well, she said, I wasn't going to tell you this, but she said, I have been praying prostrate on the floor ever since, it became clear to me that that's what it means in the Bible to worship, you prostrate. She said, so when no one else is around, I prostrate myself. And I've been doing that for a long time. She said, last year, I was in the bedroom. And she said, how you have a sense of a presence, So I was flat on the floor. I had a sense that there was something in the room with me. And I lifted my head up, and she said, I saw the same thing that girl saw. There was an angel. And she said, its head was in the top of the ceiling. It was just this gigantic. And she said, I saw it, and it was there. And she could describe, the garment that it had, how it was dressed and luminous and stuff. My wife doesn't lie. And she said it was there for a moment, and then it was gone. And I believe personally that was a preparation for her death, which followed soon after. So when you ask, are angels still around? I trust my wife. And I knew she had, that she saw an angel. That's a personal experience. I've never had that, but I know my wife has. And there are people all around the globe that will tell you that they've had experiences with angels. Now, certainly, when you get to the New Testament, there's stories in the New Testament all the time. The angel that got Peter out of prison.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Okay? Here's Peter. He thought he's, toast. This angel comes in, walks him out. We had in the Garden of Gethsemane, were there angels that comforted Jesus? Yeah. Were there angels that comforted Jesus in the wilderness? Yes. Were there angels at the tomb? Yes. So they come upon, their story is different from ours. But every once in a while they come in, and for some reason they join with us. So if you look in the Bible, turn to the book of Ezekiel, chapter 1. And since you asked the question, if you wouldn't mind telling me, begin reading in Ezekiel chapter 1, beginning of verse 4. Could you read that?
As I looked, behold, a stormy wind came up from the north, and had a great cloud, with brightness around it, and fire flashing forth continually, and in the midst of the fire, as it were gleaming metal. And from the midst of it came the likeness of 4 living creatures, and this was their appearance. They had human likeness, but each had 4 faces, and each of them had 4 wings. Their legs were straight, and the soles of their feet were like the sole of a calf's foot. And they sparkled like burnished bronze. Under their wings, on their 4 sides, they had human hands, and the four had faces in their wings thus. Their wings touched one another, each one of them went straight forward, without turning as they went. For as the likeness of their faces, each had a human face. The 4 had the face of a lion on the right side, the 4 had the face of an ox on the left side, and the 4 had the face of an eagle.
Okay, we could stop there. So if one of these showed up in your bedroom, how would you react? Like, you'd probably die of a heart attack, right? Okay, so this, by the way, is a cherub. Okay, so does God ever send a cherub as and by the way, angel technically means messenger. Okay, angel technically means messenger. And so would God ever send a cherub like this as a messenger to a human? No, because it'd knock their socks off, right? So this has a completely different form. It's in that category. If we turn to Isaiah 6, he describes seraphim. We won't go there. But seraphim, they're different, but they're also equally horrifying. Okay? So when God sends an angel, typically it has a human form, and that is to accommodate us so that we aren't frightened. We can imagine that there are all kinds of angelic forms. We only have scratched the surface. We do not know all that there is to know about the angelic realm. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Even as they take a human form, they always, when they come to a person, they say, like, do not
Yeah, don't be afraid. Yeah, don't be afraid. Which means what? You're inclined to inclined to fear. So we've looked at a few things this morning. We looked at Elohim as being a very large category. When you see Elohim, it can mean God when what? It has a definite article. That's the Elohim. He's the one that defines the category. Angels are a part of that. Humans, when we're dead, okay, we're also Elohim. We become Elohim. We're in the image of God. And we'll pick up there then. Any further questions? What's that? The definite article is Ha. Like Hashem, the name. Ha Elohim. That's right.
Could you use, Elohim to describe the Holy Spirit?
Oh, the Holy Spirit is definitely Elohim, yes.
Would you say in that context the Elohim still, or would it be Elohim?
That's a good question. We don't have any examples of that. We don't have any. So it's possible. It's something that we don't have an example of that. Yeah, it's a good question. Okay, any other questions? If not, we'll pick up with this then on Monday. Is that right? Monday we'll pick that up again. Okay, so.